Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at CNA, the Center for Naval Analyses headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, to talk to Michael Kofman, who's the head of the Russian Studies section here, and research associate Sam Bendett, who has joined us many, many times. You both have for our weekly assessment of what some of America's closest friends and allies are doing. Pun intended. Russia just had its major Vostock exercise. Michael, you and I talked about it a couple of weeks ago before it started. Sam, you and I have spoken about it also. The Russian billing took place all across the country. 300,000 troops. There were Chinese troops that were involved. We talked to General Todd Walters, the head of U.S. Air Forces Europe and Africa. He said the exercise wasn't, as big, but everybody was watching it very closely for command and control and some of those textured elements. Certainly, from your standpoint, what was the assessment of the exercise? Was it as large as it's billed? I mean, I know we talked about Zapad, that was not as large as had originally been billed. From your discriminating eye, how large was it? How effective was it? And what are the lessons you think Russia learned from it?
All right, well, first and foremost on size, I think the actual exercise was considerably smaller than advertised. That's to be expected, to be honest. The numbers for Vostock exercises, which take place every 4 years, are dramatically inflated, and oftentimes they're overstated again after the exercise, meaning they jack up the number even higher. And they can do that, one, because they have no security dilemma in the Far East. They don't worry about sort of scaring concerning NATO. And two, the Vienna document that governs exercises and agreements, a political agreement, in Europe is not effective east of the Ural Mountains. So the Russian military can literally make up whatever numbers it wants, no problem, right? And that's why the exercise numbers for Zapad that they release are always deflated and wrong in the 12,000, 13,000 range, while the ones for Vostok are always hyperinflated. So in reality, 200,000 is about 1/3 of the entire Russian military. There's no real legit way to even move that quickly to the Far East, given the limited infrastructure. That said, I mean, the exercise was sizable, but I think it was quite humble and conservative compared to the numbers released. However, they were very much going for the optics of Zapad 1981, right? So they were looking, they did on the third day a big review of forces together with the Chinese units participating at the main training range out of 9 that they had there called Sugol. And so they did a big lineup, they had a good PR show, they had quite a few troops deployed and did a big review of forces. The exercise itself was actually quite interesting. It's different from the other exercises, actually different from other Vostoks. Typically, Russia does a strategic command staff exercise. And the way this thing goes is that each military district has an operational strategic command. The job of that command in wartime is to take the units from other districts, organize them in a theater of military operations, and field them in a particular strategic directions, right? Western military districts fight facing west, Eastern military districts fight facing east, so on and so forth. That's typically how they go. Not this time. This time they changed the exercise to something they call strategic maneuvers. Strategic maneuvers are an older style of exercise. Soviet Union used to like holding these, typically with other countries not on its own territory. In fact, they're pretty popular in mid-1930s quite a bit. In strategic maneuvers, a couple military districts or the force divides into 2 teams opposing forces, conducts various types of exercises into different directions. They are not based on a fight aimed at a particular strategic direction. They're considered a somewhat higher order of exercise. That's what they did here. Eastern Military District and Central Military District tentatively provided forces to be opposing forces to each other. Chinese came in and participated at the Sugol range as titularly part of the Eastern Military District side, right? And also the Pacific Fleet and a small surface action group from the Northern Fleet were involved as well. On the whole, just judging from the returns and the forces involved from Central Military District and others, their participation was quite small. So I'm quite conservative on numbers, at least so far, until I see different. I doubt this exercise was more than 50,000 or so in terms of participants. Could be wrong on that, of course. It's quite murky when it comes to Vostok. Strategic maneuvers in particular, though, are now being advanced as a sort of in-process review of how the Russian armed forces are doing. When Shoigu Gerasimov took over, Shoigu Minister of Defense, Gerasimov Chief of General Staff, they, of course, started congealing and exercising this force, and they quickly found that the newly sort of reformed and permanent standing force that they inherited, well, it had no experience moving across large distances. It couldn't perform at ranges that they hadn't practiced in before. And so in reality, that it really lacked combat credibility and effectiveness in being able to get out of the garrison, move to the Russian borders, and engage a fight with an enemy on a piece of terrain that they'd never been to before and never practiced at. And so, 5, 6 years down the line, This is what they were looking to test and gauge. And Shoigu's advanced the idea that strategic maneuvers will be an exercise that they might do every 5 years, somewhat tied to the state armament program, to get a gauge of where the Russian military really is at. The big part of the exercise, of course, Eastern Military District is very different from the other ones. It's meant to fight as an independent combat grouping of forces. Very little infrastructure connects it to the rest of Russia, so the event of a high-end fight in battle, it's supposed to be able to conduct the battle largely by itself, with some reinforcement from the Central Military District. And of course, most of what they're gauging is probably 4 things. One, big part of exercise is all about legs. Combat service support, combat engineers being able to move units to the Eastern Military District, move them over large distances on short notice. Second one is always command and control. These are often total mobilization exercises, where the military and civilian structures have to work together as part of what we consider to be sort of a general conflict that Russia has to prepare for. Third, as always, is actual experience of officers in commanding various formations, that is being able to engage in combined arms maneuver, and of course increasing jointness across the Russian forces, getting the services to work together, and being able to do different things like executing recon strike complex or recon fires, where essentially sensors and ISR assets are effectively linked in real time through communications, command and control, to either fires, which is artillery, MLRS at the tactical level, or strike capabilities, which are more operational, whether they be land-based or air-based or sea-based, right? So it's always they're working this out and drilling this, and this is one of the big transformative lessons that they've gotten from their experience in the conflict in Syria.
Sam, I want to bring you in and get your sense, what your take is, and how the Russian press and the messaging that Russia is doing, even internally but externally, on the exercise, because as we've discussed, there's a saber-rattling element of this, that there were forces that were in the Mediterranean and elsewhere that were part of this in order to come to NATO's attention as well.
Well, the press coverage was overwhelmingly positive, as it probably should have been from the beginning. After all, why would national press not give positive impact to such an important exercise? But there was also surprising amount of diversity and detail in the Russian media. In other words, anybody could follow the exercises, the components, the forces deployed, the technology deployed. So a variety of publications covered Vostock in great detail.
And what I thought was kind of interesting is that there was some complaint among Russians that said, hey, you're cutting our pension benefits. What the heck are we doing this gigantic exercise for?
Right. Well, the general staff kind of had bad timing in terms of their announcements. During the press conference in the run-up to the exercise itself, they made sure to put a note saying that, well, this exercise is fully paid for by the operations budget and no additional funding is going into it, because they realized that their desire to basically do a big messaging piece, and of course the idea was Russia's able to conduct this massive scale exercise despite the political and economic pressure being imposed by the West. Fundamentally, Russia's still undaunted, able to defend itself, et cetera, et cetera. But given the large inflated numbers they put out, this obviously politically was not very astute from just the sheer standpoint of bureaucratic politics, and they got it, because they don't want to be talking about the number of forces they're exercising at the same time as people are concerned about social welfare spending, because in the public minds, the two will very quickly be linked, right? So they were concerned about it, but nonetheless, they went through it because they wanted to have their sort of Zapad 1981 redux.
Well, hey, that was one of the largest military exercises ever, right? So, I mean, if you want to channel that inner muscular chi, you would go there, right?
Right, but those numbers were real. Zapad really did have 150,000 people participate. So the difference between the two of those is that story was much more true. And in some ways, I mean, both exercises were sophisticated, but from the standpoint of investment in simulating real combat, Zapad was actually probably more realistic. Zapad had radio-controlled, T-55 tanks as the opposing force. In this exercise, they actually yanked T-62s out of storage, set them up for target practice when they were practicing various types of either attacking, defending, or flanking combat maneuvers at the ranges. That said, from a sophistication standpoint, it's still questionable whether or not people like Gerasimov or Shoigu were truly satisfied, because what they were looking for is to see the forces actually be able to deploy this range and engage in exercises that were unscripted, right? They were not looking for the military to do what the military likes to do, which is de facto put on a piece of military theater, right? Practice in advance of the exercise, then get to the range, and then do at the range the thing that they practice to do at the range, right? And I suspect that Gerasimov wasn't quite keen on that, and In Russian parlance, he was saying that he was looking for them to see them implementing non-standard solutions, by which he meant, don't put on a piece of military theater for me, right?
Sam, let me ask you, you said that the systems were described. We've spoken a little bit about the systems that we expected to see. What did you see? What did you see that you expected to see? What did you see that you didn't expect to see tested?
Well, one of the biggest components of this exercise was incorporating Syria lessons learned. And in Syria, Russians have tested a great variety of unmanned aerial vehicles, as well as UAVs in combination with electronic warfare and counter unmanned systems technologies as well. So at this exercise, and actually in subsequent exercises taking place now, there's a lot of UAVs tested in a variety of roles, a lot of technologies tested that are designed to counter UAVs. One of the surprises was the rollout of Uran-9 UGV, unmanned ground vehicle, which is an armored version of other UGVs that Russia has. It had limited scope, kind of limited use, but Russians tried to utilize a suite of systems, so UAVs functioning together with electronic warfare systems, functioning together with multiple launch rocket systems, and the artillery units as well. So in some ways, a lot of Vostock was kind of rehashing things that Russians have learned in Syria.
Well, I mean, look, one of the impressive things about Russia is it's always its mass fires capabilities, which were demonstrated certainly in Ukraine to devastating effect, to attention-getting effect. Let me ask you, Michael, Russia and China have had throughout, anybody who's a student of the Soviet Union and Communist Party history knows about the stresses and strains between the Soviets and the Communist Chinese. And even a couple of years ago, there were concerns by Russians that, hey, the Chinese are going to sort of, almost guest worker their way into the Far East and sort of undermine our hold on what has been classically Russian territory. Talk to us a little bit about this emerging détente between Moscow and Beijing, because both sides, despite the fact of this sort of show of force, at the same time still deeply distrust one another, even from selling weapons. Talk to us a little bit about this relationship. How much of it is by convenience, and what are the limits to how close these two are willing to get at the end of the day? Because from a Moscow perspective, Beijing is still an ascendant power, whereas Russia is sort of more of a stagnant power.
Right. All good questions, and none of them easy. That's first and foremost, the concerns about sort of China somehow with soft power conquering the Russian Far East or taking of it, to me, were always frankly nonsensical, because population migration and economic development doesn't work on the principle of osmosis. So everybody in China moves to the coastal areas of development. Nobody moves to the frozen Russian north, really, to take it over. There's a reason why in Russia 25 million people live in the Far East and Siberia, and the rest of the country, right, 120 million people live in the western southern part of budding Europe, right? So people don't move to areas without economic developments and harsh climates just because they happen to be open. In fact, most of Russia is accessible if that's the kind of life that you're interested in, right, from that perspective.
So if you're somebody who just wants lots of property, lots of trees, and a nice tundra lifestyle, there are some opportunities for you in Russia.
Yeah, if you do not like sun, and if you really like that sort of environment, absolutely. So if I say this was never a concern, I mean, to be honest, there's never a period of history where the population on the Russian side of the border exceeded the population on the Chinese side of the border. So it's probably been a problem for the last 2,000 years that people are describing. I don't see it really as a factor. Next, there's no reason why great powers living next to each other should trust each other. Trust is not a real factor between great powers. There's in Washington, D.C., there are a lot of notions about how alliances get formed that sound much closer to dating as opposed to the actual history of alliance politics between great powers, right? So first and foremost, it's important to understand, these two countries are not going to get to trust each other. Trust is not the principal factor, right? At the end of the day, most alliances that are made between powers, all right, they're made as balancing alliances. They're defensive alliances in response to greater threat. The only thing that would cause them to limit their own sovereignty, which is what an alliance is for other powers, right? Once you commit to somebody, well, that involves all sorts of political and military liabilities for you, one. Two, such hard alliances are pretty rare, right? I mean, the reality, most powers enter these sort of ambiguous, vague ententes, so they have lots of outs. Very, very rarely do they sign really these formal big treaties and alliances, but even still, they typically only do it if there's a greater catalyst. And so the only person that could essentially push Russia and China together is only the United States. And so part of what the Chinese were doing together with the Russians here, it was not about military interoperability. In fact, I highly doubt that there was a lot of sort of close coordination of working at the tactical operational level. I'm not even sure the two countries are very well set up to do that. What they were trying to do is they were sending two clear political signals. The first is, and this is a very important one, that the two countries do not see each other as a threat. For a long time, this is sort of Western notionalism that the two countries don't trust each other, so they must see each other as a threat. No, that's not the case. Countries don't balance power, they balance threats. Okay? It has a lot to do with how the strategic culture perceives the intentions and the pattern of behavior of the other side. And I don't think China sees Russia as a threat, and I don't think Russia anymore sees China as a threat really either. That's issue one. It's just, this is not going to come to pass, I think. The second issue is that the two countries are increasingly signaling that they see the United States as a greater threat and perhaps a shared threat. Whether or not that will ever lead them to ultimately develop an entente, it's hard to say. It's not about a single exercise here or another thing there. There's a clear trend of behavior of increasing military and political cooperation. How that will evolve, I think, very much does not depend on Russia and China. It depends on the United States. And when people say, well, when I look at Russia and China, at least here from Washington, D.C., I don't see a lot of alignment or convergence between those two powers, my answer is always, you should look in the mirror because you are the aligning factor. It's not them. It's all in response to you, and you are the determining factor of whether or not those two countries ever form an entente. And so what we saw at SIGIL, right, is definitely a step in that direction. It's one step, but it should all, at the end of the day, be viewed in aggregate.
Sam, let me take it to you to wrap up. Talk to us about sort of what's next on the military exercise cycle and calendar.
So Russia's going to do a hot wash. In October, it will release an actual report on Vostock, how the forces performed, what was the MOD's assessment of it. Other exercises that will take place will happen in the Southern Military District, which would also be a large-scale exercise involving a lot of groupings of forces and technologies. And again, a lot of the cycling of Syrian lessons learned, a lot of technologies, concept of operations, and tactics that Russians encountered in Syria are going to be incorporated into the future military exercises across Russia.
And before we go, by the way, Sam, excellent choice in shirts. Very well done.
Great minds think alike. So.
Yeah, thanks. So I want to ask you, I have to ask you about the nuclear-powered missile. There's been a lot of reporting on this. Russia has talked a lot about this as a saber-rattling tool, right? I mean, it's a little bit like the nuclear torpedo plans, the classified nuclear torpedo plans that were, accidentally allowed to be taped, which is all part of messaging. But in seriousness, talk to us a little bit about this system because, it's nuclear-tipped, it's nuclear-powered, it's unlimited range. It sounds like the unicorn of weapons. The United States worked on this in the 1950s. Talk to us a little bit about what this Russian capability is, if it's even anything actual at this point.
Well, I think it's quite a ways away compared to that nuclear torpedo, which is now named Poseidon. That said, look, the system really leverages a lot of Russian advancement and comparative advantages in nuclear energy and miniaturized nuclear reactors, right? I mean, the idea may seem a little crazy and wackish from the U.S. perspective. That said, it's yet another type 1 of second strike weapon. That's potentially even a weapon that could be used in the midst of conflict, at least the way they might think about it, as a form of intra-war deterrence, right, as a signaling weapon. However, I think it's many years away in development compared to some of the other systems that Vladimir Putin talked about. Still, they released some updated videos that show and photos that show that they have several prototypes in development and lined up, right? Right now, it seems to be that they've actually gone from testing it with an electrical power source to maybe even the actual nuclear power source. And supposedly at some point, it fell in the water and they're looking for it. But to be honest, it's very hard to know the details of it. They're quite murky. I don't see huge changes coming on this program. I saw a recent NPR story where people looking through satellite and Google Earth saw parts of the testing site being taken down. I find that personally to be highly speculative to try to imagine what's happening with that program just by looking at what's going on with containers from space. To me, that's about as useful an approach as trying to figure out what I'm doing in my house by staring at my roof. I suspect that on Novaya Zemlya, quite a few things are being taken down and shifted around for a very simple reason. Winter's coming, literally. It's coming, and it's very cold up there. So maybe they're taking down parts of the test site in advance of that.
Michael Kofman, Sam Bendett, the finely dressed Sam Bendett of the Center for Naval Analyses. Guys, thanks very much. It's a pleasure as always.
Yeah, great being with you.
Pleasure.